It's very nice to be back at St. Mark's, and it's nice to be back in warmer weather. Now, you may wonder, what in the world am I talking about there? Well, the last time I preached here was right in the middle of January, a number of years ago, when the entire country was gripped with a huge cold snap, which of course even came down here, much to the surprise of northerners like myself. And there was no heating in the church at that particular time, and so everyone was in overcoats, shivering. At least they were attentive at that point. Cold has a way of keeping us attentive, but it's a pleasure to be back. Like so many things in the Bible, the parable that we hear Jesus tell this morning can be so easily misinterpreted. How natural it can be to assume that this is really a parable about the afterlife. The rich man and Lazarus finally coming to their just or rightful reward. Everything gets reversed, but everything gets rectified in the afterlife, as we oftentimes think of the afterlife as being. The rich man, callous to this particular person in need, ends up in eternal torment, whereas Lazarus is finally rewarded in the bosom of Abraham. As true as this might be, there is so much else in this parable that speaks out to us particularly regarding the conditions in which we find ourselves in this world today. I think it also speaks to us about, and this gets into my domain, the value and the mission of Episcopal schools, such as St. Mark's right here. Take, for example, the phrase, "between us and you, a great chasm has been fixed." Those are Abraham's words to the rich man. Once the rich man has asked Lazarus to come down and tend to him as he endures this eternal torment. "No, that's not going to happen," replies Abraham. "There is a great chasm now. Lazarus is no longer at your disposal." And this notion of a great gulf, a deep chasm, is particularly significant in this parable because in the rabbinical tradition, the eternal resting place for the righteous and the place of eternal torment were pictured as being very close to each other physically, so that the judgment time, one could view the other. That in part explains why the rich man can see where Lazarus ended up and calls out to Abraham. As close as they were physically in the rabbinical tradition, Abraham nonetheless paints a picture of deep distance, a great chasm, so close, but so far away. But heaven and hell are not the only chasms in this parable. There is the chasm between rich and poor, between all that the purple-robed rich man had and poor Lazarus there lying, suffering at the gate. A chasm between rich and poor that we know all too well in our culture today. As real estate prices skyrocket in cities such as San Francisco, New York, Los Angeles, Seattle, increasingly populated by people of great means, so the homeless populations in these cities also is mushrooming, with the wealthy coming into daily contact with those living on the streets. So close, but so far away, within complete sight of each other. A great chasm has been fixed. And then there's also the chasm between two different ways of viewing the world. For the rich man, Lazarus has been a means to an end. He always has been. That's how he viewed the world. And he even remains that into the afterlife, as the rich man summons Lazarus to come down and cool his burning tongue. And if nothing else, please go warn my brothers of what they may be in for if they do not take note. The rich man and Lazarus look at the same situation and view it completely differently. Completely different perspectives. Parallel universes, if you will. So close but so far away. And how so much that is the case today in our world. How often we may find ourselves reluctant to enter into conversations about political or social or religious issues because we know where that conversation is going to end up. Where the view we hold and the view of others, even those dear to us, seem like a great chasm of division. An often discussed theory of management these days is that of what's called polarity management, based on the assumption in part that deep differences in our culture are here to stay. And therefore, problems that are presented to us are not going to be problems easily solved, but to be managed, to be lived with, given our deep chasms. Then there's a chasm between self and world. As Lazarus before his death and the rich man after his death find themselves shut off from the surrounding world. Just as today, where increasing individual isolation is becoming a chronic issue, people leading increasingly isolated lives shut off from the larger world. In a recent survey in Canada, 45% of the people surveyed had not seen or spoken with any of their neighbors in the past month. 21% indicated that if they encountered a medical emergency, they would have no one in which to confide. And from the aggregate of the surveys, 23% of the people who were surveyed could be considered socially isolated. And I suspect the statistics in our country would reflect the same thing. We see signs of people living increasingly isolated lives, suffering at the margins of life as Lazarus did, or suffering in some way as the rich man did in the place of torment. A great chasm between self and the outside world. Then there's a chasm implicit in this gospel between what we could be doing and we actually do. Abraham's response to the rich man is in part holding up a mirror to his life, reminding him of all the chances he had passed by in that life. A recent contributor to the magazine America, writing on the International Day of Charity, put it this way: most of us like to think that we're people of goodwill, or at least that we're not bad people. But how we act in our daily lives often reveals a substantial gulf between our behavior and how we like to think about ourselves. Chasms everywhere. Pretty sobering realities. But here, in part, is where Episcopal schools, alongside of Episcopal churches, are so important as reflective of our faith. In a chasm-ridden world, we offer something different. Not quick answers to the problems that chasms pose to us, nor a way of viewing the world that adds fuel to the fires of polarization. We offer a life, a way of life, an order to life, which does not make those chasms magically go away, but helps us responsibly, virtuously address those chasms, working at them, and all the while living with them. The mission statement of St. Mark's School speaks about educating the whole child. One part is not divided off from the others. Cultivating a sense of unity in all dimensions of life, something so needed in this highly disunited world. It speaks about developing a sense of citizenship and obligation to the larger world. And as it takes words from the baptismal covenant, it holds up the vital importance of respecting the dignity of every human being, something we will hear again very soon in this service. And in that relationship between parish and school, which is here, and which is, in my estimation, as one who deals with a lot of chasms between schools and parishes, there's a commitment to unity, a commitment to oneness, not division, that is held up, lived out, and is in part a model for how all of us are going to deal with the chasms of this world. These are the ways that people will prepare themselves to address the chasms. In part to live with what can be changed, and in part to live with what can't be changed. To understand that there is more to life than being on the right side of things. And oftentimes it is a matter of seeing both sides of things, no matter how deep the chasm can feel. That, to me, is part of the grace-filled approach to dealing with chasms. What God may well be wanting for us as we live with the divides. But there's something else worth noting in this gospel parable. Something, of course, a bit more uplifting, if you will, than the big divides. And it's something we could all very easily miss. It is the fact that Lazarus has a name. Well, that seems pretty obvious, doesn't it? Lazarus has a name, just like all of us do. Except, in all the parables Jesus tells, people do not have names. They're known by what they do, or what their background is. It is only Lazarus that is named. Is that because Jesus knew Lazarus? Is it because it was vitally important for this person on the margins of society to be named? Whatever it is, we know the Good Samaritan. We know the prodigal son. But we do not know their names. It is only Lazarus in the parables that is specifically named. A small fact, but in this world of chasms, it is no small thing. A parent comes to a conference with his or her child's teacher, carrying with them the common fear of what they might hear about that child that might be interpreted to be a judgment on his or her skills as a parent. You remember those instances? But the parent is also concerned about some of the things he or she has heard from the child. How come the parent is wondering that my child is not getting more recognition in class? How come my child's gifted and talented way with schoolwork is not more acknowledged? With fear, there also might be that tendency for the parent to want to do battle with the teacher, questioning how the teacher does things, whether this teacher is the right match or not for the child. But then something happens in the conversation between parent and teacher. The parent discovers something. This teacher knows my child. They may disagree on any number of things, view the world in different ways. But this teacher knows my child. And that makes all the difference in the world. What makes Episcopal schools so distinctive, in my view, is that the students in those schools are known. They're not mere numbers. They're not mere statistics. They're known. And if you ask students in most of our schools, as I've done on many occasions, what they most like about the school, chances are in the first or second or third reply, someone will say, "These teachers really care about us. They know who we are." This is no small thing. In a world full of isolation and anonymity, being known is so vitally important. And this is not just good practice. It's based on a fundamental theological conviction that each student, each person in our school community is a child of God, and that each one of the children of God should be known. That this is a reflection of Christ's love for the world. To be known. No small thing. In the old prayer book service of baptism, the first thing that was said was by the priest, who says ominously, "Name this child." In the more modern service, it's the parents, godparents, sponsors who do the naming. But the name is vitally important. It is the first step towards proclaiming, as we will proclaim this morning, that those who have come forward for baptism are those who have done so on behalf of that child. Know that child. And in reflection, in knowing, we are conveying God's love for the world and God's belief in all of us as reflections of the image of God. Being known, being named, a vital first step, if you will, towards addressing all of those great chasms we experience in our lives. Amen.